What is the ultimate question in life? When you ask people that question, why, you'll get a whole variety of answers.
It's not something I can answer right offhand.
Where I'm going to go when I leave this life.
When we say He is just, we mean it. These arrows, really, I should draw them like this. They don't get off the ground. God is absolutely holy. And I can go to church and become religious and give money and do good deeds, and it doesn't deal with the real problem. I've got a sin problem. I'm just a religious sinner at that point. And I can turn over a new leaf, and I can say, well, I'm going to try to do better. In fact, I could quit sinning. Well, could I? Can you? Have you ever met somebody? Really, these things, God doesn't grade on the curve. God doesn't stack us up against others in our culture. God stacks us up against His absolutely holy standard. When I was a college student, I was driving my car way too fast. I never do that anymore. Much wiser than that nowadays. But I was going way too fast, and I got pulled over, and I've never forgotten what happened, because in our culture, we tend to not understand what holiness means, or in our day, we've learned to kind of bend the rules, and you can talk yourself out of things. I grew up in a home where my folks meant what they said. But when I got into school, I found that you could kind of talk quick and get out of things. And so I got pulled over, and I thought, okay, rats, I got a ticket. But it was a serious enough. It was $27. Now, in those days, that was quite a bit of money. So I knew what to do. I'd had them before. And so I dressed up, and I went down to court. It was down in Salem. I was living in Portland, going to school at the time, but I went down to Salem to the court, and it was a fairly formal courtroom. And there was quite a few people in there, and I wasn't used to that kind of a traffic court. But just the same, I thought, well, I dressed up, and I've come down here like everybody else to plead guilty with an excuse, and they'd reduce your fine. And I thought it was worth the drive. So I'm sitting back in that back corner, and the first guy comes up, and the judge says, it says here you were speeding. Yeah, how do you plead? Guilty? Guilty with an excuse, or not guilty? And the guy said, oh, guilty with an excuse, Your Honor. He says, well, what's your excuse? And he says, well, I was probably speeding, but everybody else was moving along about the same pace. I was just moving with everybody else. He came down, just cut him off with the gavel, just like that. And he said, everybody else isn't in court. And I went, whoa. New kind of traffic judge, I didn't like it. But I'm still sitting in the corner. The next guy comes up, how do you plead? And he says, oh, guilty with an excuse. What's your excuse? And he says, well, it was a clear day, and visibility was good, and that guy was going down that excuse line, And so far, my two excuses were being used, And he's using that one, and the judge cuts him off again. And he's talking about how safe the conditions were, and the judge says, you ask that dead construction worker how safe it was. They'd had a fatality on I-5. They were doing construction, and they'd had a fatality. And this judge was in no mood to mess with people's excuses. And I'm sitting in the corner going, whoa. But then I think, these guys were on I-5. I wasn't on I-5. I was on that straight stretch of road, the straightest stretch in Oregon. They were sinners. I was just driving, And so finally it gets to be my turn, and I come up. He says, how do you plead? Guilty with an excuse, Your Honor, Majesty. And I'm standing there dressed nice, And he says, well, what's your excuse? And I said, well, conditions were good. There was a lot of visibility, and I felt like it was... You asked that dead construction worker how safe it was. $30. Now, wait a minute. I drove all the way down here. I dressed up, and my ticket goes up. And I thought, what's he saying? $30. Then I remembered everybody else's were $42 tickets, and he was reducing them to $30. He had in his shuffle, he had the wrong ticket. And he thought I was a sinner on I-5. And he reduced my $27 ticket to $30. So I said, Your Honor, sir, he gavelled me shut. And he said, one more word out of you and I'll hold you in contempt of court. And I went, whoa. And he threatened me with a jail sentence. And now I'm not just upset, I'm angry. And I'm sitting there thinking, what should I do? And he said, one more word. And I'm thinking, should I or shouldn't I? You know? And I stood there, and I look over here, and there's this bailiff saying, come on. And I look at the judge, and I walk away just seething. And I come over, and the bailiff says, and I said, he had the wrong ticket. He didn't even know. My ticket went up. He said, don't you mess with that judge. And he pushed me out the door, and he gets me out in the hall. And I said, he didn't. He said, listen, you can appeal it. He told me. Why do I tell this story? I paid my fine. It was good for me. I tell this story because very few times in life do we find out what it's like to have our mouth shut, to find out that there's a standard higher than ourselves,